Level 1. The recruit. You are identified young. Not at a recruiting office. The KGB doesn't recruit the way Western agencies recruit. The KGB selects. You are a student at Moscow State University or the Institute of International Relations or Leningrad State University, one of the prestigious institutions whose graduates feed the Committee for State Security the way Oxbridge feeds MI6 and the Ivy League feeds the CIA. Your academic record is excellent. Your languages are strong: English, German, French, or the language of whatever geographic department you will eventually serve. Your political reliability has been verified by the Communist Party, which monitors every university and which has been watching you since your Komsomol days. The Communist Youth League, where ideological loyalty is first assessed and first rewarded. A KGB officer approaches you, sometimes through a professor, sometimes through a party contact, sometimes directly, and offers you the opportunity to serve the state in a capacity that is not specified and that you understand without it being named. The Komitet Gosudarstvennoy Bezopasnosti, the Committee for State Security, was established on March 13, 1954, as the successor to the MGB, which was the successor to the NKVD, which was the successor to the OGPU, which was the successor to the Cheka, which was founded in 1917 by Felix Dzerzhinsky 7 weeks after the Bolshevik Revolution. The lineage is unbroken. The institutional DNA stretches from the leather-jacketed Chekists who executed enemies of the revolution in cellars to the suited officers who run the FSB in Moscow today. The KGB described itself as the sword and shield of the Communist Party. The shield protected the party from internal and external enemies. The sword destroyed them. Between 390,000 and 700,000 personnel served in the KGB at its height, an intelligence and security apparatus so vast that Time magazine called it, in 1983, the world's most effective information-gathering organization. You are one of the best students in the Soviet Union. You said yes. You didn't have a meaningful alternative. Level 2, the student. You enter the Higher Intelligence School, located in a compound near Moscow whose address is not published and whose existence is not acknowledged. The course lasts 2 years. You study ciphers, codes, and encrypted communication. You study arms training and sabotage techniques. You study Marxist-Leninist theory, the history of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, and Soviet law. Not because the law constrains the KGB, but because understanding the law allows you to operate within its framework when convenient and outside it when necessary. You study foreign languages intensively. You study the history and politics of the countries where you will be posted. You learn tradecraft, the operational skills that define an intelligence officer's daily work. Dead drops, surveillance and counter-surveillance, brush passes, the recruitment and handling of agents, the assessment of potential targets using the vulnerabilities that every human being carries, money, ideology, compromise, ego. You learn to construct and maintain a cover identity, a legend, that will withstand the scrutiny of Western counterintelligence services. You learn the distinction that will define your career, legal cover versus illegal cover. A legal resident operates from a Soviet embassy or trade mission under diplomatic protection. If caught, he is expelled. An illegal resident operates without diplomatic cover, under a false identity, embedded in the target country's society with no connection to official Soviet institutions. If caught, he is imprisoned or worse. The KGB historically valued illegals more than legals because illegals could penetrate targets that diplomats could never reach. The Cambridge Five, Kim Philby, Donald McLean, Guy Burgess, Anthony Blunt, John Cairncross, were recruited and handled by officers who understood that the best intelligence comes from agents who are invisible. You're being trained to be invisible. The course ends. You graduate. You are assigned to a directorate. Level 3, the junior case officer. The KGB's internal structure is divided into chief directorates and directorates, each responsible for a specific domain of the Committee's mission. The first Chief Directorate handles foreign intelligence, espionage abroad. The second Chief Directorate handles counterintelligence, catching foreign spies inside the Soviet Union. The third Chief Directorate handles military counterintelligence, monitoring the Soviet armed forces for disloyalty. The fifth Chief Directorate, created in 1969, handles political dissent, suppressing writers, artists, religious believers, ethnic minorities, and anyone whose thoughts deviate from the party line. The seventh Directorate handles surveillance of both Soviet citizens and foreigners. The eighth Chief Directorate handles communications and cryptography. The ninth Directorate commands 40,000 uniformed guards who protect party leaders and government installations, including nuclear weapons facilities. You are assigned to one of these directorates, and you begin your career as a junior case officer, the lowest operational rung. The KGB also includes Department 5, responsible for wet affairs, Mokry Dela, assassinations, kidnappings, and sabotage operations involving bloodshed, and Directorate S, which recruits, trains, and manages the illegals, officers who live abroad under deep cover with no connection to any Soviet institution, and Department A, responsible for active measures, disinformation campaigns, front organizations, forged documents, and the manipulation of foreign media and political movements. The organization is enormous, and its reach extends into every dimension of Soviet life and into every country the Soviet Union considers strategically relevant. But here's something the Western observer doesn't understand about how the KGB actually functions internally. The KGB operates on a dual hierarchy. You hold a military rank, lieutenant, senior lieutenant, captain, because the KGB is governed by military laws and regulations. You also hold an operational designation, junior case officer, senior case officer, that determines your position in the chain of command. A declassified CIA assessment noted that a major of state security transferred into the first Chief Directorate might be designated a junior case officer and find himself subordinate to a senior lieutenant whose operational designation outranked him. Your military rank determines your pay. Your operational designation determines your authority. The two hierarchies coexist and do not always align. You learn to navigate both. Level 4, the case officer. You are posted abroad. If you are assigned to the first Chief Directorate, you are sent to a residentura, the KGB station inside a Soviet embassy, under the supervision of the resident, who is the chief of station. Your diplomatic cover provides you with immunity. Your actual job is to recruit and run agents in the target country. You recruit by identifying targets, government officials, military officers, scientists, businessmen, journalists, who have access to information the center wants and who possess vulnerabilities that you can exploit. You develop the relationship over months. You assess, you approach, you make the pitch. If the target says yes, you run him, meeting in safe houses, receiving documents at dead drops, communicating through coded signals and secret writing. If the target says no, you abort and hope he doesn't report the approach to his own service. The center, Ypronderny KGB headquarters in Moscow at Lubyanka, cables requirements daily to residenti around the world. What does the American president's inner circle think about arms negotiations? What is the status of the British nuclear submarine program? What are the French doing in Africa? You collect, you report, you are assessed on the quality and quantity of your production. You are also collecting scientific and technical intelligence, Western technology that the Soviet Union cannot produce domestically and that the Military-Industrial Commission has levied as a requirement. By the early 1980s, these requirements increased by 50%. You are a spy. The word is not used inside the KGB. You are an intelligence officer, an operative, a Chekist, but the function is espionage, and the penalty for failure is not dismissal. It is recall to Moscow, which in certain periods of Soviet history meant worse than dismissal. Level 5, the illegal. You are Directorate S, the most secretive most dangerous, most prestigious path in the first chief directorate. You operate abroad under a false identity with no connection to any Soviet institution. Your legend is elaborate, a fabricated biography, false documents, a constructed life history that places you as a citizen of a Western country who has lived, worked, and paid taxes in that country for years. You speak the target country's language without a detectable accent. You hold a job. You have neighbors. You attend social functions. You are, to every external observer, exactly what your legend says you are. Underneath, you are a KGB officer whose mission is to recruit agents, collect intelligence, and, in the event of war, conduct sabotage operations against critical Western infrastructure. The illegals program produced some of the KGB's greatest successes. Rudolf Abel, born William Fisher, operated in New York for nearly a decade before his arrest in 1957. The illegal couples known as the Ghost Stories, uncovered by the FBI in 2010, years after the KGB became the SVR, demonstrated that the program survived the Soviet Union's collapse. You live a double life that is not a metaphor. It is a daily operational reality. You wake up as the person your legend says you are. You communicate with the center through coded radio transmissions or through dead drops serviced by legal residents who don't know your real name. You are alone in a way that no legal resident experiences because the legal resident goes home to the embassy compound at night and speaks Russian with his colleagues. You go home to a life that is entirely constructed, and you maintain that construction for years, sometimes decades. The psychological toll is immense. Some illegals lose themselves in their legends. Some defect. Some are caught. You are none of these things because you are still operating and nobody suspects, and the silence of success is the only reward the program offers. Level 6, the counterintelligence officer. You are second chief directorate. Your mission is the inverse of the first's. Not to spy abroad, but to catch foreign spies inside the Soviet Union. You monitor foreign diplomats, journalists, businessmen, and students stationed in Moscow, Leningrad, and other cities. You run surveillance teams from the 7th Directorate, watchers who follow targets through the streets, who photograph meetings, who document patterns of behavior that might indicate an intelligence officer is servicing an agent. You recruit agents from among the foreigners, diplomatic staff who can be compromised through honey traps, financial inducements, or ideological persuasion. You also monitor Soviet citizens who have contact with foreigners, because every Soviet citizen who speaks to a Western diplomat is a potential agent, and every potential agent is a potential traitor. The paranoia is institutional, and it is also entirely rational because the CIA and MI6 and the BND and the DGSE are doing exactly what you fear they're doing, recruiting Soviet citizens to spy for the West. And they are succeeding. Oleg Penkovsky, a GRU colonel, provided MI6 and the CIA with Soviet missile capabilities and order of battle intelligence during the Cuban Missile Crisis, intelligence that helped Kennedy understand exactly how far Khrushchev could be pushed. Penkovsky was caught by the 2nd Chief Directorate, tried in a show trial, and executed by firing squad in 1963. Oleg Gordievsky, a KGB officer in the 1st Chief Directorate, spied for MI6 for over a decade before he was compromised, likely by Aldrich Ames, a CIA officer who had been recruited by the KGB and who provided the names of virtually every CIA agent inside the Soviet Union. Most of those agents were arrested, most were executed. The 2nd Directorate's successes are measured in agents caught and executed. The metric is lives ended. You carry that metric the way a soldier carries a weapon, as a tool that serves a purpose defined by the state, not by your conscience. Level 7, the 5th Directorate officer. You are assigned to the directorate that the West finds most repugnant and that the KGB considers most essential. The 5th Chief Directorate was created in 1969 to combat political dissent within the Soviet Union. Your targets are not foreign spies. They are Soviet citizens, writers, poets, scientists, religious believers, ethnic minorities, human rights activists, anyone whose ideas or actions challenge the Communist Party's monopoly on truth. You monitor the intelligentsia. You censor literature. You infiltrate dissident networks. You arrange the psychiatric commitment of political opponents, a practice that weaponizes medicine by diagnosing dissent as mental illness and confining healthy people to psychiatric institutions where they are drugged into compliance. You manage informants in universities, factories, churches, and creative unions. Andrei Sakharov, the nuclear physicist who became a human rights campaigner, was surveilled, harassed, and eventually exiled to Gorky by the Fifth Directorate. Alexander Solzhenitsyn, whose novels documented the Gulag system, was expelled from the Soviet Union. Vasily Grossman's masterpiece, Life and Fate, was seized by the KGB. The manuscript itself was arrested, an act of literary suppression so total that the novel was not published in the Soviet Union until 1988. Countless others, lesser known, unprotected by international fame, invisible to the Western press, were arrested, imprisoned in labor camps, committed to psychiatric institutions, or simply destroyed professionally and personally through the systematic application of state power to individual conscience. This is the directorate where the KGB's role as the party's sword is most visible and most brutal. The shield protects the state from external enemies. The sword is turned inward against the state's own citizens, and the officers who wield it are trained to believe that dissent is a disease and that the cure is suppression. You believe this or you perform the belief so convincingly that the distinction becomes irrelevant. In the KGB, sincerity is not required. Compliance is. Level 8, the resident. You are the chief of the KGB station in a foreign country. The resident, the equivalent of the CIA's chief of station. You manage the residentura, the case officers, the technical officers, the communications specialists, the support staff, who operate under diplomatic cover within the Soviet embassy. You are responsible for all KGB intelligence collection in the country. You task your officers. You review their agent cases. You approve operational plans. You communicate with the center through encrypted channels, receiving daily requirements and transmitting the intelligence your station collects. You manage the relationship with the ambassador, who may or may not know the full scope of your activities, and who may or may not appreciate the risks your operations create for Soviet diplomacy. You manage relationships with the intelligence services of Allied Socialist states, the Stasi in East Germany, the STB in Czechoslovakia, the SB in Poland, who cooperate with the KGB, but who also pursue their own interests, and who sometimes run operations that conflict with yours. Your station may include 30 to 50 officers in a major Western capital, Washington, London, Paris, Bonn, making the Soviet residentura significantly larger than most Western intelligence stations in the same city. The size reflects the KGB's appetite for intelligence and its institutional culture of redundancy. It is both an asset and a vulnerability, because every officer under diplomatic cover is a potential target for the host country's counterintelligence service, and the more officers you deploy, the more opportunities the opposition has to identify, surveil, photograph, and potentially recruit your people through the same vulnerabilities, money, ideology, compromise, ego, that your officers exploit in their own recruitment operations. You watch your officers the way your officers watch their agents, with professional suspicion, because defection is the KGB's greatest fear, and the resident who loses an officer to the West loses everything. Level 9, the chairman. The chairman of the KGB sits at the apex of the most powerful intelligence and security apparatus the world has ever known. The position was held by men whose names define the history of Soviet power. Ivan Serov, the first chairman, a man complicit in the deportation of entire ethnic groups. Alexander Shelepin, who modernized the KGB's foreign operations. Yuri Andropov, who led the KGB for 15 years. and then became General Secretary of the Communist Party, the only KGB chairman to lead the Soviet Union. Vladimir Kryuchkov, who led the 1991 coup attempt against Gorbachev. The chairman reports to the Politburo. He briefs the General Secretary. He commands an organization that conducts foreign espionage on every continent, suppresses political dissent in 15 Soviet republics, guards the borders of the largest country on earth with dedicated border troops, protects the party leadership with 40,000 uniformed guards, monitors the armed forces for disloyalty, intercepts communications, conducts assassinations through Department 5, the Department of Wet Affairs, Mokriedela, named for the blood, and shapes the political landscape of the developing world through active measures, disinformation, front organizations, support for revolutionary movements, and the manipulation of media and public opinion in target countries. The chairman's power is second only to the general secretary's, and in some periods the distinction between the two has blurred. The KGB was dissolved on October 24, 1991, 2 months after the failed coup. Its functions were distributed among successor agencies, the SVR for foreign intelligence, the FSB for domestic security, the FSO for protective services, the FAPSI for communications. The names changed, the culture did not. Vladimir Putin served as a KGB officer in the First Chief Directorate, stationed in Dresden, East Germany. He became director of the FSB in 1998, president of Russia in 2000. The sword and shield of the Communist Party became the sword and shield of one man. The lineage from Dzerzhinsky to Putin is unbroken. Level 10, the cycle. Right now, at the Academy of the Foreign Intelligence Service, the SVR's successor to the KGB's Higher Intelligence School, a student in his mid-20s is studying English and the political structures of Western democracies. He is bright, linguistically talented, politically reliable in the way that the modern Russian state defines reliability, which is not ideological conviction, but personal loyalty to the system that provides his career, his salary, and his sense of purpose. He doesn't call himself a Chekist. The word belongs to an older generation that spoke of the revolution and the Great Patriotic War and the global struggle against capitalism with a sincerity that his generation cannot replicate. He calls himself an intelligence officer. He will be posted to an SVR and residentura in Washington or London or Berlin under diplomatic cover, and he will recruit agents and collect intelligence using tradecraft that has not fundamentally changed since the KGB codified it in the 1950s, because human intelligence is the human intelligence, and the vulnerabilities that make people betray their countries, money, ideology, compromise, ego, have not changed in a century. He doesn't know about the Fifth Directorate or the psychiatric hospitals or the names of the dissidents who were destroyed by the organization whose legacy he inherits, or he knows, and it doesn't trouble him because the state that employs him has redefined the KGB's history as a source of institutional pride rather than institutional shame. The statue of Dzerzhinsky that stood outside Lubyanka was torn down in 1991. The building still functions as the headquarters of the FSB. The student graduates. He is posted abroad. The cycle begins again.